So here we go. It's going to be a Wood Elf Skaven focus for today. We've bought ourselves a lot of skirmishers, and just starting off, we're going to be hitting up these Forest Goblin Spider Riders for some pretty nice damage. We can stay out of the range fairly easily, and with a little bit of kiting back, they shouldn't be able to do too much damage here. We'll still have to be a tiny bit careful though, and we're going to feint a few charges just to try and get them to retreat. If they don't, they will be taking a lot of impact damage. And it looks like we may even get a few picks here, just right off the get-go, killing off a few of these skirmishers. And trading up so far, actually. We can pull away with a few of the troops too, and then resume the sort of skirmish style. Durthu, he wants to be moving up and staying pretty aggressive, as he will happily take many of the fights presented in front of him. And we also want to be healing up our cavalry too, of course, to make sure that they don't take too much damage, as we do want them to live for quite a while. Now, the greenskin infantry is also another pretty big threat. We want to be cycle charging them as much as possible too. The orc boys taking a good amount of damage. And if you time it correctly, the volleys of the archers will actually shoot into the backs of the infantry. So that works out pretty well for us. And in the meantime, I guess our Glade Captain can just snipe out the River Troll Hag, since she actually has 360-degree fire. Something that I was unaware of earlier. As for our cavalry, they have taken a little bit of a beating at this point, but I think I'm still doing alright here. Lots of our cavalry is still alive. The River Troll Hag is slowly getting picked apart, and Grom isn't doing too much damage. Now, there is a lot of Boar cavalry here that we will want to deal with, and Durthu's going to be throwing down a ton of AoE on top of them, just to try and settle that situation as quickly as possible. Because I'm planning to get my troops over into the back line to actually kill off all these archers that are focus firing Durthu. The archers appear to be the win condition for the greenskins. To chase them off with my infantry would work out pretty well. Durthu has taken quite a bit of damage so far, but he's very tanky. I don't expect him to be routing or anything, and very importantly, we have actually collapsed in on the back line of the greenskins now. So at this point, it's really just chasing them off, and then we should be good. The distraction too is really good to let our spears to kill off this group of units on the left flank. And with Durthu, we're just gonna run circles around with him to make sure that he doesn't get sniped out. Grom too, actually going for my caster. We definitely don't want her to die, so I'm going to pin down all the heroes here with our caster, with the cavalry, and then bring in Durthu to actually finish things off. He should be able to do that pretty well, as he is an anti-large specialist. And as for the cavalry, as long as they don't take too much damage from, I guess, skirmishers really, then I should be good. So to push away the skirmishers, I'm going to use my infantry. They're really good in general at keeping skirmishers away, as they're just really tanky. And for greenskin skirmishers, they're not especially strong at actually cycle charging, so that should work out pretty well. You can see they're now taking a lot of damage, having stayed to try and take care of Durthu, and because of that, most of them will be routing off. It is important that I do chase them off though, since the HP of the skirmishers isn't very important. It's more their ammunition. And there we go. With the routing of those guys and the killing of heroes, we have managed to pull out the first win of today. Pretty good. Essentially, it really was just killing off the skirmishers, then diving into the back line. You can see the archers took quite a bit of damage, and the focus fire on Durthu didn't really pay off. I was spamming a lot of AoEs with Durthu, And I think that might have been a waste of magic. Instead, putting down healing probably would have been better. But at least my cavalry still managed to live, which is basically all I could ever ask for. The next game against myself and Malverde is going to be a Skaven versus the Beastmen. Classic counter pick against Skaven, but we'll see if the new units have actually changed the matchup. If you look at the army, it's going to be a lot of actually an Eye of Morsley. Interesting. This is the second time I've seen a Cygor in recent history, and it's going to throw a rock at my wolf rats. Pretty easily dodged, as the rats are very quick. And we're going to just chase off these Cygors right away. This Warlord and get a lot of damage on them, and a surround with the wolf rats should be more than enough in this situation. There are a few units of infantry though that I will have to worry about, but there we go, a really nice initial engagement. Starting out, this is really good because our Warlord has his armor buffs, and he'll be able to use those to prevent himself from taking a lot of damage. The wolf rats are much faster than the Centaurs too, and there we go, we've already chased off quite a few of those units. 2 Centaurs already gone. That's a couple thousand in value. Just a really nice initial start. Meanwhile, our Packmaster doing pretty well himself too. He's going to be throwing down buffs on top of himself to keep himself from dying here. And then yeah, he should be just fine in this fight. He's tanking for the Poison Wind Mortars to be doing a lot of damage. And some raiders actually on the far flank revealing themselves will be a pretty easy pick also. The raiders, Ungor raiders, will die very quickly to my wolf rats. Unless the wolf rats actually lose there. They're actually taking a lot of damage, so I'm going to pull them away and allow them to cycle charge. As for a Packmaster, he does rout, but that's not extremely important here, as he is... yeah, it's not extremely important, just because he will be coming back, and at pretty decent HP too. As for the Beastmen infantry, they are definitely not worrisome at all. Although my Lord actually gets routed off, he'll be coming back too, and with the combination of our wolf rats and brood horrors, the infantry should be going down. Kazrak is diving straight in towards my Lord though. That's a little bit scary, as we don't want our Lord to die here. He's actually taking a pretty decent amount of damage, so we're going to pull him through some Skaven slaves, try and put him in a safer position. We don't want him to get routed off the map, as that would be actually a really big loss for us. He is the main source of single entity damage, so keeping him alive is going to be extremely important. As for our wolf rats, they have won their fights against the infantry, just thanks to their cycle charging. And for all the monstrous troops of the Beastmen, it's just going to be a few Minotaurs and Chaos Spawn that I can cycle charge in and out of. That should go fairly well. Beastmen are also rapidly running out of their infantry. And the Eye of Morsley, although it is unhindered for most of this game, it isn't especially scary here. I don't have a ton of weapon teams that it could really take out, and that's going to be a GG from our opponent. Pretty nice, essentially just kiting out against all these monstrous troops, using my wolf rats to pick apart the infantry, and our brood horrors to win out any fights along the map. So there we go. Pretty clean game. If you look at the Eye of Morsley, was firing the whole game, but artillery generally doesn't pay for itself over the game unless it uses a lot of ammunition. The Centaurs too, at 15 damage value. This is why I run the wolf rats. They are really good at winning out against Centaurs. So good that sometimes they'll basically get no value. The build was okay, maybe against some of the older Skaven builds, especially the Vanguard Ungor Raiders. seem to be a counter against the classic Skaven box styles, but the new style is here, and it's gonna be a lot of kiting from here on out. This next match is gonna be Skaven against the Beastmen again. Let's see, sorry, just writing down some notes, and it looks like there's gonna be a few Warhounds actually coming in, diving in towards my skirmishers, a backline of Chaos Spawn, and just a little bit of infantry. Nothing especially scary here. And we can quite easily, immediately, get these wolf rats routed off using our brood horrors. Just using our terror and mobility to our advantage. The Ungor Spearmen herd shall be having similar problems, and some summons from our caster will really be able to hold up the Beastman front line. As for our Lord, he does get a little bit surrounded by Centaurs, but he can pull away pretty easily. And now that we have successfully disengaged here, we can now continue to fire with our Poison Wind Mortars. Chariots are moving in, diving onto my Lords, and I think I can just focus fire that with our two heroes. Centaurs on the right flank aren't especially scary, as I do have Wolf Rats ready to engage, and that should be an easy chase off on that front. On the left flank, though, some Centaurs do engage onto my gutter runners. Not great, but with our Skaven Slave Slingers, I think they should be able to be dealt with. Now, on the right flank, our Wolf Rats want to be getting into position, and also our Lords need to be finding a safe place here, as the Beastman mobility is beginning to collapse in on my backline. There's a little bit of a worry that I'm going to get overwhelmed here, but I have enough Wolf Rats where I think I should be able to do okay, especially heading into the late game, as long as I keep my hero squad alive. And to do that, I'm going to be throwing down a ton of summons while I deal with the Centaurs, because right now my priority is to deal with the Beastmen mobility. Using the Brood Horrors and the Wolf Rats in the late game are going to be very important for actually winning out the game, because I'll be able to cycle charge and pick off key targets, and that combination works really well against the Chaos Spawn and Minotaurs. So that's going to be the goal. Just really focusing on those Wolf Rats, killing off cavalry, and then from there hopefully taking out the win. But it's still going to be a fairly hard fought battle. Many of my gutter runners have fallen, and that does reduce my skirmisher potential by quite a bit. However, in the center fight, I'm feeling pretty confident, as I do have my Plague Priest caught up in the middle of the fight, just Mortis engineering a lot of the Beastmen infantry. And after that, it should basically just be the Minotaurs left, which, of course, I have my Brood Horrors to go ahead and deal with that. So that's not too much of a worry. And it even looks like our Plague Priest is holding up relatively well in this situation. Some Centaurs are continuing to push through into my backline, but I have enough range units, I think, to peel them away. But it looks like that might not be the case, and a few of my Poison Wind Mortars could actually go down here. My Packmaster too, actually taking a bit of damage from the monstrous units of the Beastmen. I'll definitely have to be a little bit careful here. But I think really the fact that I still have so many high HP Wolf Rats means that there really shouldn't be too much for me to worry about here. Balance of power is also very heavily in my favor too. And given that a lot of the power for the Beastmen is in their summons right now, means that I actually do have a pretty nice lead. So at this point in the game, it's essentially just this Beastmen blob of units. We have some Chaos Spawn, and a Brave Shaman of Wild, and of course Mogre. Not an especially scary force, just because I have now completely taken over the mobility advantage. The Chaos Spawn will take a lot of damage from my Slingers, and surprisingly enough, they take a lot of damage from cycle charging from my Wolf Rats too. So that shouldn't be too much of a problem. I'm going to bring back my Packmaster too, just to put in a little bit of healing onto my wolf rats. And I don't really need to chase off the beastmen forces, since if they do rally, I will actually be able to... I can actually just kill them off as they come back to the main fight. Since I do have mobility advantage, so they shouldn't actually be able to reunite with this blob. That should be pretty good. CF Bomber coming into hello. I guess I'll just be reading chat a bit while we manage all of this lag. And hopefully it's not a disconnect from Butcherbird here. And there we go. Oh no, it looks like he did drop, but I think I was ahead enough in that game where probably take that victory. If you look at the single entities here, I had the Plague Priest, the 2 Packmasters, and that's basically all I needed to win out the game there. Poison Wind Mortars actually didn't pay for themselves, but they are much better in defensive builds. In a build like this, they are much less important, since I'm trying to deal with all the mobility of the Beastmen. Nevertheless, they still did pretty well, and also another unit that does really well are these Skaven slaves. Almost always paying for themselves there. Doing pretty good. Here we go. For the second game against Butcherbird, it's going to be Wood Elves up against Bretonia. My cavalry is going to cycle charge the infantry front, and he's going to be bringing in either his pox arrows to fire in, or his cavalry to countercharge. And what that does is it allows my Deepwood Scouts to loose their volleys onto the archers, actually get a pretty decent amount of damage in. So I'm going to pull back, wait for the archers to fire, and then immediately pull back away. The Deepwood Scouts just fire right on in, and you can see the combination of the cavalry and all of the archer fire works out pretty well here. Now there was a nice charge of Yeomen here, actually stopping some of my forces, but a few spears can handle that situation pretty well. It gives some time for my cavalry to disengage, and then my spears can support that retreat option. I will use a single unit of Wild Riders though. It's definitely a little bit unfortunate, but if you look at the forces of the Wood Elves, they've actually taken a pretty decent amount of damage here just from my spears, so I'm not too worried. As for these Bretonian archers, they're going to be a little bit scary. In some games before, they hard carried a lot of the situations, so I'm going to actually be focusing them down in this situation. So as soon as they stop moving, I focus them with the Deepwood Scouts, and as soon as they start firing, I hit them with pendulums to kill them off as quickly and efficiently as possible. The archers, they're very important to actually kill off here, as in the late game their ammunition will do a lot against my forces. For the cavalry, I'm going to prevent their retreat using Drycha. She's going to throw down her summon, and then that's going to allow my forces to dive straight onto the cavalry, actually getting a pretty nice counter charge. And then the cavalry is going to immediately pull back to make sure they don't get counter charged themselves, bouncing into a separate unit of cavalry. Bretonian archers are firing, but the pendulums are here to assist and to actually shut them down. And there we go. That's one of the archers actually shattered now, and the second one are going to be taking a lot of fire from the Deepwood Scouts. As for my cavalry, they want to be staying as mobile as possible to get that charge bonus, and what better situation to do that than to countercharge some Bretonian cavalry moving into my backline. This is the general strategy that you do to win out this match, since you're always getting counter charges with your cavalry while avoiding counter charges many of the time. The Deepwood Scouts, it's completely fine if they take a little bit of damage just to win that cavalry fight. And especially now that the infantry engagement has actually gone fairly well for us. I think this game is basically won. All the Bretonnian archers are out of the question, and it's just Lewin and a few of his cavalry units left. Up against my essentially full army of spears at this point. So they'll be having a really rough time, but a full HP Lewin is nothing to scoff at, as he is still pretty hard to take down. Nevertheless, we routed off most of the Bretonnian cavalry. We'll chase them off with the Deepwood Scouts, and now, with basically just Lewin at the helm, I'm going to bring in my spears to go ahead and surround him. Have Dreicha engage in combat too. And then that should be it. Some rallying archers are absolutely no problem to my Deepwood Scouts, who will be focus firing them down. And then for the final unit of archers, they can simply take a pendulum to rout them off. Lewin getting absolutely bogged down by my troops won't be a threat. And the Bretonnians, they don't have many AoEs actually at the moment. Only Awakening of the Wood, which is still a little bit scary in this blob formation that I have going on here, since I sort of just haven't been really controlling these troops too much. If there were a whatever that stronger Bretonnian spell is, the big AoE spell that isn't Awakening of the Wood, if they did have that, I would really have to focus on keeping out of a blob. But in this case, that won't be showing itself this game, and it's just going to be a pretty clean win. Just yeah, going for some nice Wood Elf versus Bretonnia play. The Bretonnians do definitely have a lot of options here, but it can be a really hard matchup if you have the correct Wood Elf build. A lot of my cavalry did end up dying. I could have been a little bit more careful with them, but in the end, they traded out against the Bretonnian cavalry pretty effectively. So I think it was an okay trade. Yeah. Essentially, we shut all the cavalry down. We shut down the archers using our pendulums there. And then the war dancers could carry out the rest of the game. So GG, and on to our next opponent. And I can begin with the introductions. The next map is going to be up against Legion's Empire with my Skaven build. Gone for a pretty nice Empire cavalry build. Lots of Knights of the Blazing Sun. They do have magic damage resistance, which is good against the Warp Fire Throwers. But I'll tell you right now, it's not going to be nearly enough against this force. Some Pistoliers too, taking to the flanks. I'm going to hit them with my Jezzails, getting in some pretty minimal initial damage, but any damage is still good, as I'm not really being pressured to advance here. Of course, Spirit Leeches could come down, but Overcast Spirit Leeches on these forces isn't especially strong. You'll run out of magic pretty quickly. I'm also expecting a good number of Huntsmen to reveal themselves here in just a moment, and they shouldn't be too much of a problem either. In general, ranged archers aren't really good against the weapon teams, just because their models are actually quite small and pretty difficult to hit. As for Marcus Wolfhart, he is advancing just a tiny bit. I would want to move in my Brood Horror to try and engage onto him, but there's a little bit of a problem there in that Marcus, he probably has Huntsmen ready to support, and I do not want to get my Brood Horror sniped out by Huntsmen. I need it to cause terror for the Empire cavalry forces. A cannon, great cannon in the back line too, actually forcing my engagement now. I'm going to have to move up as quickly as possible. So let's get started. Jezzails are going to be putting in the initial damage onto the onto the back line of the Empire, hitting up their cavalry. Pistoliers aren't especially scary, as I do have many troops in the back line to actually stop them from getting too much damage in. And there we go. The Huntsmen do reveal themselves, but my weapon teams are going to be getting engaged in just a second. Now, the Knights of the Blazing Sun are moving on in. They're going to be eating a nice volley of Warp Fire Thrower damage. And there we go. They're already on the verge of routing. As for my lord, he's going to be throwing down the dreaded 13th spell to break into the Empire backline, as he will likely be getting routed off fairly easily. So just due to all the spells and sniping coming down onto him, so it's important that I actually use all my winds of magic there. That unit of Storm Vermin will just rampage into the Empire backline and do fairly well. Now there is a unit of Empire Cavalry that has managed to break into my backline, but I still have many more lines to break through, and they should be getting routed off fairly easily too. My Brood Horror will be advancing also. And yeah, there we go. With a few volleys, the Empire Knights are now beginning to fall, taking actually quite a bit of damage. However, my Lord, he's taking quite a bit of damage himself, and I'm going to have to be a little bit wary of that situation. I don't want my Lord to die outright here. So to make that a little bit harder for the forces of the Empire, I'm going to be retreating with my Lord now, and actually trying to bait out Marcus into a more difficult situation. He's going to get surrounded by wolf rats, and actually taking quite a bit of damage. As for the Empire Knights that did charge into my back line, they are now going down fairly quickly, as my guns have been able to form a pretty nice concave on top of them. And there we go. The Empire backline is now getting engaged on. The Brood Horror continuing to charge forwards too, causing terror, will be doing quite well. And as for the infantry, they're going to be continuing to get, they're going to keep getting melted down by the warp fire throwers. They should be routing off in just a second. And there we go. Second line of the Empire is now gone. The Brood Horror has been pressuring Marcus quite a bit. A little bit of a misplay from me. I actually do let a few of my weapon teams get charged, since my camera wasn't actually looking behind me. But it's not too much of a problem, as I've actually established quite a dominant lead in this situation. The wolf rats have been able to chase off everything. The Brood Horror is still alive, and another dive-in on Marcus should be able to kill him. There's no cavalry left for the Empire either, so there we go. Essentially just closing out the game. Wolf rats are really good at chasing off Empire casters too, as they have fairly low armor and low melee defense. They should be dying pretty quickly. And as for Marcus, even if he does kill the Brood Horror, which he might since he's kiting away from it, I had the wolf rats at the ready to finish him off too, so absolutely no problem. As a final volley of warp fire throwers, a final volley from the warp fire throwers brought off some infantry, and there we go. It's going to be a pretty decisive win. So there we go. If you look at the artillery, it did not pay for itself because, like I said, this build is actually a rush build, surprisingly enough. If you went more defensive, of course, artillery would be a lot better against weapon team. As for cavalry, they did not pay for themselves in the slightest, and that's because the build has so many guns, you actually need a lot of cavalry to rush it effectively. Balanced builds will generally do really bad in this situation, as we saw. And there we go. That's going to be it. The warp fire throwers not getting nearly as much damage this time around, but that's just because there wasn't a ton of infantry. Now, this next game, Wood Elves up against Legion. I am up one game, so he's fighting for his best of 3 life right now. Coming in with an army, pretty standard, some Ushabti Greatbow, some chariots, and Nahakara horsemen with a pretty standard front line. All pretty standard, nothing too crazy here. Like I said earlier, I want to be very much focusing on winning the infantry fight while keeping my cavalry safe and away from Ushabti Greatbows. Our lords and heroes want to be dodging the Greatbow fire as much as possible. Actually, an initial volley on my lord gets in some pretty scary amounts of damage, but some dodging techniques over here should be able to solve that situation pretty well. In the meantime, my infantry will gladly take a front-on fight against the Tomb Kings, and even though some Spirit Leeches are coming in, that's not too worrisome. as I do have healing, and I can patch it up fairly well. By dodging, I'm also negating the value of the great bows a lot. And here we go. The initial infantry fight is underway. Some of my troops can even sneak through the front line now. My cavalry, they're going to be trying to push through. I'm going to be healing up my heroes and engaging them onto the chariots while trying to sneak as many spears onto the back as possible. My cavalry too, if they can engage onto the Ushapti, that would be absolutely amazing, since they are one of the main win conditions for the Tomb Kings. The chariots are very dangerous to my infantry though, so I'm going to pin them down with a net, charge them with my stag knights, and hopefully pull them apart. As the chariots, once they're down, I should be able to overwhelm on the infantry front and then hopefully do pretty well. There's a big fight here, so I'm going to buff everything with my Sisters of Thorn. And here we go. The Ushapti are now compromised, which is very, very good for me. Some horsemen are coming into the back, so I'm going to charge them with my cavalry and bring in some spears to support in that situation too. As for my hero squad, they're going to be healing up and continuing to chase Ushapti, while my front line continues to break through. We're seeing a mass collapse on the Tomb King's front line, which is exactly what I was looking for here. As for my cavalry, they're doing okay. I still want to be a little bit careful with them, as they do trade pretty badly into Nahakar horsemen, or they trade inefficiently, but it usually just ends up as a long, grindy fight. So it's not the worst that I have my cavalry engaged into horsemen here. As for Arkan the Black, he does get surrounded by stag knights, but a charge from horsemen will make things a little bit scarier there. I'm actually going to heal up my stag knights just so that they don't take nearly as much damage. And then just a continued goal on chasing the Ushapti great bows is going to continue. Any cavalry that I can actually have free in this situation are going to be pulling to the side and chasing down the great bow. The other option for them would be to chase down the chariots, but given how damaged the chariots are currently, I don't think that's nearly as important here. I do lose my stag knights though, and that is going to be a very painful loss. And some of the chariots are still alive. Things could actually go south for me in this situation. Really, it's just I guess it's just my lords and heroes that are doing especially well in this situation, but everything else is sort of trading about evenly. I'll definitely have to be a bit careful. And given how important my infantry are for winning out the rest of this game, I've netted down the chariots to actually make sure that I can kill a few of them with my spears. The chariots, I have so much infantry left, and they amount to so much of my money. In the case that all my lords and cavalry die, I really, really want those chariots dead. So I'm going to send in my cavalry to pin them down, at least as best as I can. And then after that, I'm going to send in my lords, but a really nice summon from Legion does block the charge of my cavalry, and I'm going to have to pull out away from that. Still though, the spears have managed to pull down the skeleton chariots, so I think I should be fairly good in this situation, as basically there's nothing left for the Tomb Kings. Essentially just a few units of Nehekara horsemen scattered around the map. So they're not really scary. They will be able to cycle charge, but I have so much infantry left, they'll actually take pretty bad trades even when cycle charging. A few healing spells too, just to go down on this big blob of infantry, should be able to secure the win, as Legion gets closer and closer to army losses. And there we go, speak of the devil, it kicks in, and that's gonna be another pretty clean win for myself. GG, well played. The build going pretty well, courtesy of Loopy in Clan ODM actually providing the build a while ago. I just made some minor changes, and it works out pretty well. In general, even, most of my Wood Elf builds are stolen from my clan with some minor edits. my dwarf versus my wood elf versus dwarf build actually being stolen from Zyphos, really just adding in the Sylvan Knights, and that's it. So still though, yeah, some very good builds, and of course some pretty nice plays too. If you look at my cavalry, they actually did pretty good. They didn't live, but they paid for themselves. I could have been more careful with them, but that didn't matter too much. This build is really good against Ushabti Greatbow specifically, just because you can negate most of their damage in the early game, and then, yeah, and then just do that. It played out exactly how I expected it. For this next best of 3, I am now up against Dr. Jellyfish. He has gone the greenskins, and looks like it's going to be a pretty heavy mobile build. Lots of spider riders and even some fanatics coming in hot. I'm going to need to throw down some summons and get my volleys of damage out as soon as possible before those fanatics actually start firing away. My brood horrors are going to be causing as much terror as possible, and there we go. We actually managed to rout off the front line fairly effectively. We actually shatter some of those night goblins immediately, and some fanatics do come down, but not doing great amounts of damage. Things actually going pretty well for me on this initial engagement. Now the next point of contention is these goblin archers. That could be a little bit scary, and of course the cavalry moving in along the sides. The archers are going to get pushed onto with our warp fire throwers, and the cavalry on the sides are going to get chased off by my wolf rats. As for the chariots that are moving in, they are definitely quite scary too, but I have double brood horror here. They should be able to ward them off fairly easily. And as for the double black orc big boss, a little bit of an uncommon pick. They shouldn't be too scary against the forces of my double brood horror and of course Snicketch. My caster too will be spamming out spells just to rout off all the infantry along the sides, and my wolf rats, actually overextending a tiny bit, are going to actually be in a situation where a little bit of an unfortunate situation, since I can't defend my backline without my wolf rats. But it looks like they might actually just barely make it there on time to shut down the goblin skirmishers, and then I should be good. Goblin great shaman in here too. Retreating away from my forces isn't especially scary, and with the charge of my wolf rats onto the greenskin cavalry, I'm feeling a lot more comfortable now. One of my brood horrors does get routed off, but I'm expecting that to rally, as they do have some fairly nice leadership. And for my triads, I'm just going to throw down those summons to make sure that nothing really converges on the brood horror. Snicketch in the meantime, fighting off that black orc big boss, should be able to win it, if not at the very least trade evenly into him. So I'm very comfortable there. And if he does try to run away, I also have the Deathmaster Sigil that I can throw down to secure that kill. So there we go. Many of the greenskin forces have routed off, and my backline is still secure. Both Rattling guns are still at nearly full HP. One of them even at full models. Is really not worried in the slightest. The Black Orc Big Bosses are getting chased off, and with the turn onto this Black Orc Big Boss, a little bit of focus fire will go a long way. And here we go with the Rattling guns shooting on into him. They'll be getting slowed down, but maybe not, actually connecting with Snicketch, and is going to be taking that fight. But it doesn't really matter too much, as the greenskins have lost enough forces, but they will be pushed to army losses, and there we go. It's going to be a pretty nice win. A little bit dicey in a few situations, but we saw in that game the Goblin Fanatics, although a nice touch, really melt down to warp fire throwers way too quickly to really pay for themselves. The value on my frontline weapon teams was insane, and the backline was defended really well. The Rattling guns pushed back the chariots, and I basically had answers to everything there. I think really for Jellyfish, the main focus would be timing that engagement a tiny bit better, since if it's mistimed, a build like this will really cause a lot of pain. And here we go. It's going to be a Wood Elf game up against the Lizardmen. I have a build that I've been practicing for a bit against them, and I'm excited to see how well it does in this situation. I have basically Glade Guard that I'll be focusing on defending for the majority of this game, and a ton of Spears, Cavalry, Dirthu, and even some Blade Singers to make sure that that happens. Now, initially, I'm a bit worried about Chameleon Skinks, so I'm going to pull my Blade Singers back just a tiny bit so that they don't get shot by Chameleon Skinks, at least not without having them get punished. And yeah, it's just going to be a slow march towards the Lizardmen front line. Our archers will be firing away. Dirthu will be throwing down manticores where appropriate, and as soon as our archers are in range, we don't really have to advance too quickly. I can simply just sit back and let them do their thing, putting in as much damage as possible into the Saurus warriors. If I can win the frontline fight, I should be good to go as long as they don't get skirmished to death. And it doesn't look like that'll be too much of a threat, as really the skirmishers are instead going to be the Pterodon riders, who aren't too worrisome. Now, I could try and turn to fire on top of them, and I think I will, but that does actually expose me to getting shot at by the solar engines down the line of my Glade Guard. That is not a great situation, so I have to make sure that I turn to shoot the Pterodon riders as little as possible, otherwise those solar engines are going to be doing a lot of damage. Some AoEs coming in from Mazdamundia are going to be pretty brutal too, actually hitting up many of my Glade Guard, and there we go. Like I said, those sideways shots into my Glade Guard are going to be very painful, so I think I actually misplayed a tiny bit. I instead want to be focused firing these solar engines instead of these Saurus warriors. I'm now going to be moving up too with my Blade Singers to try and break through the front line so that I can actually shut down all of the solar engines, and that's going to be the plan. Going very aggressively now, Dirthu. He's going to be hitting up these skink skirmishers and even summoning a manticore to help out in this situation. Spears want to be blocking up the skinks, since the skinks are with their javelins are a pretty big threat to my infantry. And oh no, a big AoE actually coming down onto my Blade Singers. I'm going to pull away with them, try and dodge that, and it looks like most of them managed to live, so that's a decent outcome there. As for these Croxagores, our range units are now in range to actually fire in on top of them, and hopefully that goes okay. Some cavalry moving into the back too. I definitely want to be dealing with that and making sure that they don't kill all my archers. But a little bit too late. I actually let my troops get charged in the back. Definitely not great, but I'm still doing okay right now. The front line of the Lizardmen should be collapsing fairly soon. The solar engines aren't able to fire right now, and Dirthu is still doing okay. I have pumped up some of my spears though, a little bit too aggressively on a single Chameleon Skink unit. So I'm going to pull one unit of spears back, just so that they can be more useful elsewhere. Instead, using them to defend my Glade Guard. That should be a much better situation. As for Dirthu, he's going to be trying to rout off these troops, as we want our Glade Guard able to fire as soon as possible. But he's actually netted down, so Dirthu, he will be having a little bit of a hard time actually protecting the troops there. But as soon as that net runs out, he'll be able to go back to bouncing around, causing terror where he can. Still, that might not be too important here, as he is actually getting poked down rather hard here. And Dirthu will eventually fall if I'm not careful. The solar engines are focused firing him down. But one advantage that I do have is that I have quite the infantry advantage. Both sides have sort of traded out their cavalry, But my spears are going to be really good at actually stalling out the lizardmen forces here. The spears, they are shielded, so they won't take as much damage from these skinks. And they'll in general just hold for a really long time and also put in some decent damage onto the Bastillodons too. So hoping that they do pretty well. As for all my archers, a few of them are actually getting picked off by some remnants of the lizardmen forces, which is definitely a little bit unfortunate. I would want these Glade Guard to stay alive, and if they can actually win this fight, in the late game my Glade Guard will be able to do a lot of work. Just their extra shots coming in the late game is going to be an absolutely huge boon for me, as they'll be able to use up the rest of their ammunition, probably kill off most of the lizardmen forces remaining here. And there we go. The Pterodon Riders and the Cold One Riders just barely get routed off by the Glade Guard, and that means that they'll be able to come in the late game now and hopefully kill everything off. Durthu too is still alive, although just barely. He's going to be just fighting out very favorable engagements, as we want to make sure that he does not die. If he does die, the Wood Elf leadership actually isn't extremely high, and the loss of your lord will actually see a lot of your troops getting routed off. So Durthu, he's just going to be retreating and trying his best at not taking too much damage from these skink chiefs and other units. As for our Spellsinger of Life, she's actually much healthier, and her job is going to be taking out the skink chiefs. As these skink chiefs, they do still have a lot of ammunition. In the late game, they will be able to continuously poke me down, and if I can actually pick them off, then that should be the win, as the solar engines will run out of ammunition, and Durthu can quite easily finish them off. So that's going to be the plan. Our Spellsinger of Life is now engaged onto the skink chief, along with some of our Glade Riders. They won't be able to shoot their very annoying range shots anymore, which means that Durthu can freely march straight into the Lizardmen forces and dive directly onto Mazdamundi. Skink Chiefs 2 are now out of the game, as they are beginning to rout off, and it looks like might have just barely pulled off a victory here. It was quite close, especially given that Durthu almost died, but the fact that my infantry was able to win out the day seemed to really help. The fact that many of my Glade Guard just barely held on to life for most of the game is really big too. And there we go. We just barely won it. I think in the future I'm going to have to play a lot more aggressively with this build to shut down the solar engines, since the prolonged fight didn't work out very well there. The solar engines actually managed to get a lot of shots off, and that almost resulted in a loss, but things started going better as soon as I actually dove in. And yeah, just looking at the damage values, the solar engines did almost pay for themselves because of my slow engagement. And as for everything else, I did okay, but not amazingly. My cavalry sort of traded themselves out against the Lizardmen cavalry. And really the true heroes here, I think, are these Eternal Guard. Really having all those guys in the late game helped out an absolute ton. So here we go. I'm going to be playing as the Skaven up against the Lizardmen, going for a more standard Skaven build, actually. Just for a standard box today, with a lot of Skaven slaves and the Plague Priest plus Skulk combo coming in just to provide a lot of single entity fighting power. I can use summons with Skulk, that is, just to hold up the Lizardmen line, and that will give my Poison Wind Mortars actually a lot more time to fire in onto the infantry. Summons to hold up the Saurus Warriors 2 should go pretty well. And I'm wondering where the rest of the Lizardmen money actually is. I guess most of it actually went in onto the Croxagores, and if that's the case, I'm actually feeling very confident as the Croxagores, they do get pretty hard countered by my Hell Pit Abomination, which specializes in anti-single entity fighting. As for the Saurus Old Blood, he's going to be taking a pretty bad fight up against the Assassin and Squulk. So, I think I should be in a pretty nice situation. Some debuffs now coming down, and Squulk throwing down his AoEs should be able to hurt the Saurus Old Blood quite a bit. I'm also going to bring in the Hell Pit Abomination to hit him too. And in the meantime, I'm just going to be sitting back, relaxing, and letting my backline just wait, ready to defend whichever units they need to. Some Croxagores do manage to sneak in through the front though. A little bit of a misplay on my part, as I didn't have any summons to actually stall them out. But the Rattling Guns can actually put in some pretty good work against them. As for the Skink Skirmishers, I'll want to make sure that they stay away from my large single entities. And I'm going to pull back the Hell Pit Abomination, specifically to get him away from those Skink Skirmishers until I take them out. To take them out, I'm going to be using the Poison Wind Mortars. And with just a few shots, the Skink Skirmishers are already at half HP. And I'm feeling very confident now. Some of these Cold One Riders do sneak into the back. They will be shutting down my Warp Lightning Cannon. But the Warp Lightning Cannon, it's not especially important in this late game situation, as there aren't too many targets for it to take out. Most of my important units here are really just my expensive single entities, and given that they are still healthy, I think this should be a pretty clean win. My Assassin, fighting the Saurus Old Blood, actually in a pretty bad situation. I let him overextend, and he will be getting taken out by these Skink Skirmishers. A little bit of a misplay, and had the game been closer, that would have actually been a really bad situation for me. But I should still be good. These Croxagores are a little bit of a threat, and I think they're going to be my next target to take out. That shouldn't be too difficult though, as they are surrounded by many of my troops. And if I can bring my weapon teams to safety too, that will definitely ensure a more secure win condition in this case. As I do also have the Council Guard, and the Council Guard will be able to kill off any cavalry that actually comes in onto my forces. So there we go, another very strong AoE from Squulk. We'll be routing off most of the Lizardmen forces. The Council Guard are still healthy, but I have lost my weapon teams. My Assassin is still alive though, and I can just retreat with him, distract some of these skirmishers for a while, and hopefully get him back into my blob in the late game. So that's going to be the goal. Squulk too, with his single target direct damage ability, Liber Bubonicus, is going to be saving that for the Saurus Old Blood to hopefully get the Lizardmen into a mass rout in the late game. As they are basically all really beat up in this situation. And once this guy dies, with the terror of the Hell Pit Abomination and my Plague Priest, there really shouldn't be anything that the Lizardmen can do to avoid a rout. Most of the Croxagores are at very low leadership, as is the case with most monstrous units. And I have way too many infantry troops to actually kill with the Skink Skirmishers. Let's see, some of the Croxagores do come back though. And that's going to be a little bit of, well actually no, that's really no problem at all. As, yeah, they're just way too beat up. I just need to close out this game essentially. And with that Saurus Old Blood so close to Squulk, I'm going to try and get that Liber Bubonicus on top of him. And hopefully end off the game right then and here. So there we go. It does connect. And that's going to be a lot of damage on this Saurus Old Blood. And probably a mass rout from the Lizardmen forces. I'll also go for the Skink Priest of Heavens, as he is the highest, one of the higher cost units for the Lizardmen. And as soon as he's gone, it should be army losses. And there we go, the Lord is dead. So you can see the leadership dropping for all of the forces, and now is the opportunity to strike, to actually win out the game, since all of these troops are going to be rather easily routed off. There you go, Kroxigor's getting routed, and that's going to be army losses for the Lizardmen. Pretty decisive win, really, as essentially the core of my army, the single entities here, were going to be very hard to kill off in the late game. Optimally, as the Lizardmen, you would have some single entities of yourself to cycle charge, maybe some Manticore summons, or having a lot of range units too in reserve to shoot at them would do good. But in this case, the Skink Skirmishers really just could not jump onto my big single entity. Kroxigors too did actually really badly just because of the build. And yeah, this is usually why Lizardmen want to avoid this matchup. So game number 2 against Turin. Going to be Wood Elves up against the High Elves. And I am going to slowly advance, since I do have to try and shut down these bolt throwers, which will be getting in some pretty decent damage against my troops. Illyrian Reavers too will be able to poke my forces, but a single volley from Way Watchers really puts a pretty easy end to that, as they take a ton of damage, and they'll likely have to retreat. Another volley should be able to take them out, and even if they do dodge, the Way Watcher shots are just so fast that it still works out pretty well. But the bolt throwers are getting in quite a bit of damage. I'll have to be a bit careful with my Way Watchers. I'm going to actually pull them back, just so that they don't end up dying here. My cavalry, on the other hand, are going to be fighting off some Silver Helms, and the Way Watchers are going to be poking away at the High Elf archers, I guess, since the archers will be able to get a lot of damage on my troops if I am not careful. Waystalker poking away at the Silver Helms, generally doing pretty good, but seems like I misplayed a tiny bit, actually letting a lot of my Way Watchers take a lot of damage from these bolt throwers. I'm going to continue retreating with them though, and healing them up as they go, since yeah, as long as they live into the late game, I should be just fine. The more Silver Helms are also on the flank, and some shots should be able to take those guys out. My Lord too can also net them down, and then that should be a pretty nice situation, as the cavalry advantage should be quite well in my favor at this point. I'll still have to be a bit careful, since those bolt throwers are going to continue firing in on my Way Watchers, but they've only killed one model so far, so I still have enough to kill off the Dragon Princes once it comes down to the late game. Still, I'll have to be really careful, since Way Watcher ammunition is hugely important here, and just losing them willy-nilly is going to be really bad. So I turned off Fire at Will, and I'm going to be keeping them nice and safe and stealthed to make sure that the bolt throwers can't shoot on them too much. As for the Dragon Princes, I have three full HP units of Wild Riders to go ahead and take care of them, so I'm feeling pretty confident. I'm also ready to throw down a net using my Lord if need be, to really take care of the situation fairly well. Just multiple different options, since these Dragon Princes are one of the more dangerous units that I'll have to contend with here. In the meantime though, while I wait for them to get engaged, I'm going to continue shooting away at these archers and trying my best to take them out, since they'll be slowly poking away at my Eternal Guard, and I definitely want my Eternal Guard at high HP to help win against all the infantry here. The bolt throwers too, I'm not really doing much to actually take them out, but that's because they will eventually run out of ammunition, so they're not too much of a worry. Feckless too, actually getting suspiciously close to my Wild Riders. I'm going to split them up, since I feel like a net might be coming down, and then I'm going to net him down myself, followed by a Way Watcher volley, which absolutely annihilates him immediately. That is one of the main threats that you face when going up against the Wood Elves. You have to be very careful that your lords, without stagger animations, don't get sniped out by Way Watchers. The nets from Glade Ladies are really easy to throw down, and if you're not careful, it will be a very, very bad time. Now the Silver Helms are now engaging into combat. I'm going to get a nice counter charge with my cavalry, since I do have a pretty nice advantage on that front. And then with the Dragon Princes coming in, I'll just be sniping them out with my Way Watchers, bringing in my Wild Riders and debuffing them to really secure a nice engagement there, and likely winning out that fight. As for my infantry, I have lost that engagement. Most of my infantry have actually died to the Silverin Guard, but that's not especially important here, as we still have our win conditions, that being the Way Watcher. Some of these Silver Helms do come in though. They're diving in onto my Way Watchers, but I can just retreat from them. And now that the cavalry advantage is fully secured, I'm going to be using my cavalry to kill off the remaining archers of the High Elves, and likely closing out the game from there. There's not a whole ton left really for the forces of the High Elves, and the Silverin, although really strong, cannot really deal with being cycle charged constantly. So that's just going to be the plan. I'll be hitting them in the back with my cavalry as soon as the archers are dealt with, but that might not even matter, as we do push our opponent into army losses. And there we go. Gonna be another win under the belt, with the High Elves up against the Wood Elves. If you look at the Bolt Throwers, they did get their value, but they didn't really help very much at shutting down the Way Watchers. If you look at their value, they still paid for themselves tremendously, despite the Bolt Throwers shooting all game, and the fact that there wasn't really a lot of cavalry to dive into my backline gave me almost free reign. Not to mention the loss of Teclis was also really painful for the High Elves, and honestly the only thing that I could have done better here for shutting them down was killing off the archers a bit better. They got a lot of value because I was a little bit too over aggressive with my Way Watchers in the early game. Nice, so we are now up against Call Harmon for the last best of 3 for today. I brought with me the same Wood Elf build as before. Gonna be a whole ton of Glade Guard to protect, and a fairly aggressive push using my War Dancers. Try and shut down the Lizardmen frontline. Flanks are going to be covered by my many spear units and my Glade Riders. While I continue to push through, there are actually no solar engines in this build. So I'm actually going to play this a tiny bit differently than I thought I would. I'm going to try to blob them up near Durthu, and then my spears are just going to be at the ready covering the flanks. My right flank will eventually get collapsed in on by these many forces over here. That should be just fine, and it looks like my blobbing strats are working out fairly well here, as most of this infantry do actually get blobbed up. As for the right flank, my spears have actually prevented most of the infantry there from doing a lot too. And now that I have successfully created a nice blob fight here, Durthu can throw down his AoEs, and I'm getting in a ton of shots onto the sides of the cavalry here for the Lizardmen. I really want to shut down the cavalry, since that's a pretty huge advantage for Call Harmon. And it looks like Masamundi's actually moving in a bit aggressively, so I'm going to actually go ahead and send a Manticore directly towards him, hopefully taking him out. My archers are able to get in a lot of damage and are generally doing pretty well. But the cavalry, they have finally snuck through my front line. The cavalry on the far flank, though, has taken a lot of damage, and they will likely be falling in just a second. But another unit of Cold One Riders, the seemingly endless Cold One Riders apparently, are going to be a little bit of a problem, as many of my Glade Riders do get compromised. Or not my Glade Riders, my Glade Guard do get compromised, but I still have a lot of spears at the ready. They're going to be diving in and trying their best to salvage the situation. Not to mention, our single entity strength is still fairly strong, but losing most of my archers is extremely rough. Just a very strong committed rush build coming on in is looking like it will likely win out this fight, even though we did manage to stop up the infantry. That likely just was not enough in this situation. Dorthu now getting very much so engaged on, surrounded by cavalry, but he almost has another manticore that he can throw down. I'm wondering if how much of an impact that will make, though, given the current circumstance, as looks like Karl Harmon is set up to win up this first game against the Wood Elves. But we'll have to see. Dorthu is quite a beast. He has anti-large, makes some decent against the Cold One Riders. Let's see here. Yeah, it makes them pretty good against the Cold One Riders, but will it be enough? Now getting really low on leadership. The Skinks are going to continue poking away at him, and a fireball coming down on Dorthu will be a huge debuff, but his AoE sword ability, some nice clumping up from Karl Harmon, allows us to get a ton of value here, but it looks like it's going to be army losses. And GG! Karl Harmon taking out the first win of the day against me. Pretty good, and it looks like we have a fight on our hands. Now, this build is more catered to deal with the solar engine type builds of the Lizardmen. And in this case, a heavy committed rush seems to be a pretty nice counter here. Essentially, you have a ton of Saurus warriors to pressure the front line. And the Glade Guard, Glade Riders can't really protect your range units against the Lizardmen cavalry. So, I might have to worry about that in the future, but this Lizardmen build is a little bit open to a few other Wood Elf builds. Although those Wood Elf builds are very uncommon. So I do like it. The committed rush looking like it works out pretty well. And now we'll be moving on to the next game. So here we go on to a Skaven versus Norska game against Karl Harmon. He is up 1 game. He's bought a lot of infantry up against our build today. I do have a lot of my skirmishers, and they're going to move up immediately and just start poking away at the Norskin front line. My wolf rats are going to take to the far flank, and the skirmishers, they're just going to be picking away at marauders where they can. My actual mainline infantry force is going to continue pushing towards the right hand side so that they can yeah, they're gonna push to the right hand side while I retreat. And some summons too should be able to do pretty well here. Our brood horrors can cycle charge in and out of the infantry also. That should slowly wear down the Norskin front line. They have healing too. We'll be able to protect them. And yeah, it's just going to be continued kite. I want to be poking down Wolfric where I can too with my slingers. And my wolf rats, they'll be able to get quite a bit of damage onto the Norskin infantry. But some wolves, you actually engage onto my wolf rats, getting in some pretty decent damage, and seeing my lord getting a little bit surrounded here. But a little bit of a bait, as he does have many buffs that he can throw down onto himself, keep himself nice and healthy. My infantry going to be continuing to retreat. I do not want to get them engaged until much later. And our brood horrors are just going to be picking away at the skin wolves essentially. Burning Head does come down, but that's actually a bit in my favor, as my my wolf rats do disengage, and it almost actually gets these skin wolves to rout off. One of them even getting fully routed off is pretty good, but a pretty big boat comes down, misses most of my troops thankfully, and I should be fine. It is a pretty big engagement though, and I don't want to be taking big engagements with the kite build. So the plan is I'm going to be running back with some of my troops now and regrouping. Just getting in that regeneration and also continuing to get picks where I can. Skin wolves are going to be getting engaged on by my triads, taking some pretty nice damage, and my screaming bell is also still doing pretty good too. Ammunition is fairly high, and with the wolf rats back in action, I'm feeling quite confident once again. Now my packmaster is taking quite a bit of damage. I'll have to be a bit careful on that front. And my wolf rats, they're going to need to find some nice positions to actually engage here. One of my guys actually getting routed off is a little bit of a problem, but not the absolute worst, as he will be rallying. It just sort of sucks that one of his routes is actually gone. And if he routes off 2 more times, then that's my guy off the battlefield permanently. Our warlord, too, taking a lot of damage from Wulfric. I'll need to be pretty careful about that. And I'm going to pull him back so that he can take regeneration. Burning Head does come down. Some pretty nice damage, but nothing too crazy. And my mobile forces, they can almost fight the mobile forces of the Norskins. That's going to be a really nice fight for us. The Eshin Triads, too, getting in really good damage versus Wulfric. And my skirmishers are able to continue peppering into him, too, getting in a lot of damage, actually. Brood Horrors regenerating is absolutely huge for me, too. And the Skin Wolves will be pushed back by my Triads really easily. These Norskin Marauders, taking a pretty big charge from my Wolf Rats, are going to be taking a lot of damage. And then the Plague Priest can come in, too, and actually start using his Mortis Engine effect to ruin most of these guys over here. Still though, a lot of my wolf rats actually do get routed off. Or actually no, they just barely manage to hold, which is really good, because I think this fight here is going to go really well in my favor. The Plague Priest putting in a lot of damage onto all this Norskin infantry is going to be absolutely great, and a summon just to make sure that the javelins can't kill my troops is going to be really, really big. So I'm just going to get the summons to kill off the javelins, and then it's going to be another disengage to really stall out this game, give me some regeneration, and hopefully a pretty clean win versus the Norskins. Balance of power is actually quite even still. But given that many of these guys are actually routing off now and I have Wolf Rats ready to chase them, I'm feeling very confident. Wulfric is still a pretty big threat, and I'll have to be careful that he doesn't cause too many problems. My Lord, too, actually taking a lot of damage. I'm gonna have to retreat with him and get him into a safer position where he can just regenerate. My Plague Priest is actually beginning to go down. Some bad traits coming in on my side, but I'm about to get some pretty nice picks with the Wolf Rats at the very least. I think that should be able to help me out in this fight. The Javelins taking a lot of damage too in the back line, but I'll have to be a bit careful to make sure that I don't lose too many troops here. Norskin Ice Wolves actually getting in some pretty good damage, and my Packmaster, looks like some Skin Wolves are actually moving in to try and pick him off, but I'll see if I can actually bait that out, as my Wolf Rats can actually dive in now and probably kill off quite a few Skin Wolves. I'm going to be buffing up my Wolf Rats as they charge in. And Wulfric may just come in a bit too late to really help out in this situation. One Skin Wolf unit does go down, but a big boat hits up all my Wolf Rats, and that's pretty bad. Packmaster's gonna have to disengage, but at the very least, some of the Norskin infantry over here on this side are getting collapsed in on. Hopefully a few good picks here will be able to swing the tide in my favor. But I really need these Wolf Rats to come back if I want to do well. Another big burning head, going to be very painful. And it looks like the Javelins, they're not posing too much of a threat. It's mostly that I'm beginning to run out of units, and my skirmish potential is slowly dwindling. My Lord actually taking a huge volley of javelin fire, and oh dear, I think we may have lost this one out. Some nice burning heads and picks off on my Wolf Rats coming into play, and Wulfric actually killing off many of the key targets. I think in this case it did come down to Call Harmon just playing better than myself, but you never know. A crazy comeback could come down, but not in this case, as I do hit army losses, and that's going to be GG. A pretty fun game. I wonder if my Poison Wind Mortars would have actually been good here, since there was a lot of infantry from Norska. The Poison Wind Mortars are meant to counter infantry heavy build, and I think For the Skin Wolves, I did counter them pretty well, but the Triads probably weren't the best choice. Instead, if I had gone for Spears, that could have gone a lot better. I did pretty well in the early game with the summons and kiting backwards, but I think in general I could have piloted that build a little bit better. But definitely not saying that Call Harmon played badly there. He definitely played really well and pushed my build to its limits. I think it'd be fun to try out this matchup again later in the future, since if I micro this perfectly, I think I should still be good. But nevertheless, well played to Call Harmon, and that should be it for today.